Welcome along, fellow time travelers and strange historians. As you may know, I shoot a lot of travel videos as I travel around the world. And I also produce videos about historical subjects. This time around, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Rather than producing a video that shows you the same photos and videos that you've probably seen a million times over, I thought I would just talk and bring you along with me on a walking tour through Central Park, starting with the Plaza Hotel on 59th and 5th Avenue, and we're going to walk all the way up to the Dakota Apartment Building on West 72nd Street. And this time around, we're going to talk about how music influenced the lives of Generation X and shaped their personalities. If you like this sort of content, then I'll talk about other subjects while showing you really cool videos that have absolutely nothing at all to do with what I'm talking about. But at least it'll give you something really cool to look at while I'm talking about movies and fashion and pop culture and all sorts of historic subjects. Before I begin, please like and share this video and subscribe to my channel. And please become a member of my YouTube channel and join me on Patreon. You can see the link in the description below. Now let's begin our journey. Generation X, as they are referred to by the media, is awesome. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. And so in this show, we're going to try to understand why, with a particular emphasis on their favorite music. I'm going to begin by saying that I think that the generational term, Generation X, is kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's not real. It was a term created by a novelist, and it really doesn't mean anything that is of any real value to anyone. The idea that someone can identify and categorize demographic groups based on their birth years anywhere around the world, and that they share some sort of common bonds is kind of silly. Moreover, all of the terms that are used to define generations show very poor persuasion technique. I mean, come on, none of them are easy to remember or attribute to any particular time period, and none are visual. In fact, I venture to say that anyone who uses those terms, usually weasels in the mainstream media, sound like fools when they use them. And you probably agree with me. I mean, here's a test. Answer the following as quickly as you can. What period of time was the greatest generation? The silent generation? Baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, Generation Alpha, whatever the hell that is. I mean, honestly, it's all kind of silly, isn't it? If anything, terms that may be used that may bind generations should be based on pop culture relevance, since that, in many cases, is the only thing that binds them together. Now, for the record, Generation X is meant to describe people, and I would assume that likely means Americans, born between 1960 and 1980. After all, it is unlikely that those who were teenagers in the 1980s had many shared experiences and many common bonds with 15-year-olds at the time in China or Turkey or Iran or Spain or Japan or anywhere else. One thing that all Americans born between 1960 and 1980 have in common, however, whether they were rich or poor or black or white or lived on farms or in cities or were attractive or unattractive or anything else, was pop culture. So for example, MTV. It launched in 1981 and it changed and shaped everything. And it was mostly for those under 30. And so those born in 1960, at the beginning of what's termed Generation X, were only 21 years old when MTV launched. But prior to that, there were music videos, which were really promotional films. And of course, the Beatles made some, but so did others. And there were so many shows in the 1970s that featured musicians performing live or lip-syncing on elaborate sets. And so it seems to me MTV generation would probably be a better term than Generation X, but even that's not good enough. But either way, pop culture, specifically music, is one of the main things that ties that generation together. And that is one of the many reasons why Generation X is awesome. Let's explore. When it comes to music, growing up in the USA in the 1970s and 1980s seemed really cool. Prior to music videos, kids and teenagers saw their favorite bands on TV shows, like Saturday Night Live or Don Kirshner's rock concert, and at live concerts, in stadiums and clubs and other venues. There were no cell phones, and most people didn't even have cameras. And so it really was a great bonding experience for all those waiting online, getting into the concert, and spending time watching and listening to songs they knew and loved, that everyone knew and loved. You see, back then, People didn't have access to a million different ways to get songs like people do today. Gen Xers heard songs on the radio. They bought records and cassettes and 8-track tapes, and they heard songs, like I said, on TV and in movies. And they heard beautiful songs. In fact, many of the same bands that sang really hard rock songs could, and often would, sing ballads too. Many years ago, I saw an interview about the Eagles, and I think it was Don Henley who said that even though the Eagles broke up, a lot of people, unless they were diehard fans, didn't know they broke up. And that is because around the same time was when the long-format classic rock radio stations began. And so people around the United States would turn on the radio, and along with whatever new songs were out, they would also hear the Eagles and other bands. And he said something like, that people not only listened to the Eagles, but they did things while listening to the Eagles. And we all totally know what that means, don't we? People associated special or everyday moments in their lives, being in school, going out on a date, riding their bikes, driving in a car, different seasons of the year, being at the beach, with the music of the Eagles. And so even today, a Gen Xer might be listening to a song, let's just say of the Eagles, and they will shuttle back in time, right? Like time travel style, and they will see and feel and maybe even smell the scents of a particular time and place where they were when they either first heard that song or when they heard that song. But of course, it wasn't just the Eagles, right? It was all kinds of great music. And what else was amazing about radio stations in the United States is that Gen Xers grew up listening to a wide variety of music, and they liked a wide variety of music. And so back then, you would have teenagers who would listen to, let's just say, Pink Floyd, but they also listened to Meatloaf and Donna Summer and Air Supply and Ted Nugent and Bee Gees and John Denver and Hall & Oates and Bruce Springsteen and so many others. Especially when MTV came around, and it was this type of song, and then that type of song, and then this type of song, and then that type of song. And so the variety of music and musical styles was really astonishing. And so that's the way it was. It didn't matter. It could have been pop or punk or country or rock or disco or anything else. A good song was a good song. A great voice was a great voice. Fantastic music was fantastic music. And that's all that mattered. And many of the songs were positive back then. And they were emotional back then. And Gen Xers had their favorite songs and their favorite moments in songs. A certain way that the singer sang, a certain lyric, and they made the songs that they listened to their own. As if they were one of the few people to understand certain songs and could relate to certain songs because the songs spoke to them on so many different levels. I mean, think about Bat Outta Hell. It was one of the best-selling albums of the 70s. All the songs were sung by Meatloaf. All the songs were written by Jim Steinman. And even though it was incredibly popular, and Gen Xers knew all the songs, it felt esoteric. It felt personal. It felt like, I'm like one of the few people who could really appreciate this album. I'm one of the few people who could really appreciate this song. But it really wasn't true. You had tens of millions of people who loved those songs and could relate to the songs. People would listen to songs on Bat Outta Hell and think, he's singing what I would sing if I was able to express myself like that. And so all these incredible songs that were written in the 70s and 80s, many of which were love songs, made Gen X more emotional than following generations. And the endless stream of love songs that they listened to were embraced by males and females, especially teenagers. Songwriters and singers spoke for them. They expressed what the teenagers were unable to express on their own. Listening to people sing about love has always been good therapy. It's also been very motivational. It gave Gen X hope that when they grew up, that someday they might meet someone that they can like and love. After all, with so many great artists singing beautiful songs about love, it's kind of got to be a cool thing, right? Love seemed to be kind of important. That seed was planted inside of Gen X. Love seemed to be the sort of thing that made people happy. And Gen X thought that was something worth pursuing. And so yeah, Gen X grew up liking boys and girls, and asking each other out and going out on dates, and sometimes the experiences of dating were good, and sometimes the experiences were not so good. But Gen Xers didn't freak out if they had a bad date. They didn't freak out if their boyfriend or girlfriend was a little bit kooky, the way that younger generations do today, where it's suddenly like it's the end of the world and they're the worst human being that's ever existed. Gen X took out their sadness and their frustrations in music. I mean, come on. Every Gen Xer has memorized the lyrics to Total Eclipse of the Heart. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. By the way, it was written by the great Jim Steinman, who wrote all the songs for Bat Out of Hell. But either way, every Gen Xer sang Total Eclipse of the Heart while alone in their rooms. If you're a Gen Xer, you know you did. You listen to Total Eclipse of the Heart when you're alone, and when it came on the radio, you pumped up the volume and sang along. You know you did. Gen Xers learned a lot about love and relationships and sadness and heartache and happiness from music. You see, that is something else that younger generations don't understand. Gen X was the last of the teenagers. And by that I mean those who were part of a definite teenage culture. Gen X had their own music, their own movies, their own fashion, and their own slang. In the 1980s, you could spot a teenager from a mile away. Not like today, where teenagers look and dress and act and talk like adults. And this is not to their benefit. This is not to society's benefit. Teenagers today get brainwashed by the media, especially the news, just like adults. Gen Xers, they weren't susceptible to brainwashing. In so many ways, Gen Xers were so much smarter than subsequent generations. But that's a subject for another show. But one thing that's important to consider is that Gen X teenagers knew quiet time. They weren't overwhelmed with noise from every direction. They didn't have cell phones when they were teenagers. And so they weren't constantly bombarded with information coming in at them from every direction. Gen X teenagers had time to daydream. There's a lot of value in daydreaming. You guys know I talk about that a lot. Daydreaming is really important. Now there's a lot more to say about Gen X music, and I could talk more about that in the future, but for now, I want to mention one more thing. I mean, listen to me. If you are ever feeling down, right? You're ever feeling blue, go ahead and listen to some 1950s music. Put on some Buddy Holly, Little Richard, Chuck Berry. Go listen to the Del Viking singing Whispering Bells, one of my favorite songs, and you won't even remember what you were unhappy about. As you likely know, music with a cheerful and upbeat melody and lyrics can have a positive effect on the release of endorphins in the brain. Gen Xers grew up with a lot of happy music, including movie and Broadway soundtracks. I mean, for crying out loud, Gen X grew up with the soundtrack to Grease and Saturday Night Fever. How cool is that? And Gen X teenagers danced a lot, whether in clubs or in their bedrooms. How many teenagers today are dancing in their bedrooms? Probably not many. How many teenagers today are going out to nightclubs and dancing? Probably not many. And perhaps that is why Gen X teenagers didn't do all the drugs and deal with all the psychological issues that teenagers in following generations did and do. Yeah, some Gen X teenagers smoked pot, smoked cigarettes too, drank some beer, vodka cranberries, screwdrivers, yep. LSD was probably not too easy to come by, but if they really wanted it, yeah, they could get some LSD. But hard drugs, they weren't easy to come by. There sure weren't as many as there are today, nor all the crazy pharmaceutical pills. And guess what? Gen X teenagers wouldn't have wanted them or needed them anyway. They had something much better. They had great music. They were born and grew up listening to the greatest music pop culture had to offer. They memorized countless songs that said the things they thought and wished they could say. MTV in the 1980s rocked their worlds. Once again, the variety of music they listened to and loved: Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, Bruce Springsteen, Duran Duran, Culture Club, and so many more came upon them hard and fast. In the 1970s and 1980s, every day was like opening up a treasure chest. Every day was like Christmas. New songs, new music, new fashions, each band coming upon the music scene with amazing songs like no one had ever heard before. The sheer variety and creativity inspired Gen Xers to be among the most creative generations ever. You see, they learned that it's okay to be creative. It's okay to take chances and see what happens. And guess what? Contrary to the nonsense being spread around today, Gen Xers couldn't care less if someone was gay or straight or bi or this or that or anything else. Black or white, it didn't matter. Gen Xers appreciated hard work and talent. Those things mattered above and beyond anything else. What were the artists contributing? What were people contributing? What joy were they bringing to the world? That's all that mattered. Michael Jackson, Prince, Rick James, Stevie Wonder, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, Earth, Wind and Fire, Lionel Richie. By the way, what do they all have in common? They were among the biggest artists that Gen Xers loved. Younger generations should keep their idiotic assumptions about racism to themselves, because they sound like freaking idiots. Gen Xers couldn't care less what anybody's skin color was. Liberace, Elton John, Freddie Mercury, Boy George, George Michael, Pet Shop Boys, Dusty Springfield, and so many others. What did they all have in common? They were gay. They were also among the biggest artists that Gen X loved while growing up. So, once again, younger generations should keep their idiotic assumptions about the subject to themselves, because they sound like idiots. Gen Xers couldn't care less if somebody was gay or not. Gen Xers did not care. Gen Xers never cared. Gen Xers also grew up with songs that were patriotic, that made them feel proud to be an American and proud to be alive. Gen Xers grew up with songs that gave them hope for the future. And that is what helped contribute to Gen Xers turning out to be technological pioneers and independent, and able to face economic challenges, and to be able to handle breakups, and to be able to handle dealing with all sorts of people, and to be able to balance their work and personal lives. Gen Xers were infused with an entrepreneurial spirit, and they went on to be great contributors to business and music and film and literature. Now listen, none of this applies to every single person who was born between 1960 and 1980. That would be just a bizarre assumption. But if we are talking about American kids growing up in the 70s and 80s, and what sort of things shaped their personalities, and how and why so many of them turned out as they did, the music they listened to, that they all listened to collectively, played a gigantic role. And it's honestly not as easy to say that about generations that came after, is it? Something went wrong in the mid-90s. Something happened. All the fashions faded away, and people started dressing like they were going dumpster diving. And there weren't many ways to differentiate people of different ages. T-shirts and jeans, t-shirts and jeans, t-shirts and jeans. We'll talk about Gen X fashions in the future, because I think we could all agree that beginning in the 1990s, pop music has fallen from great heights. And though that may sound trivial to some, all one has to do is stop and take a look around and survey the landscape of our society. Are people who grew up after the 1980s doing any good? Do teenagers today seem happy to you, collectively? What is missing from their lives? Yeah, they could listen to the music that made Gen X happy, and they should. But it's not theirs, is it? It wasn't made by them, and it wasn't made for them. It's not seeped into their pores. It's not woven into their DNA. They don't have the associated memories that Gen Xers do when they hear songs from their childhood, from their teenage years. And so on one hand, you could say music isn't everything. But on the other hand, music is everything, isn't it? You see, America created the idea of the teenager with their own world in the 1950s. Their own clothes, their own music, their own movies, their own everything. And do you want to know who destroyed the world of the teenager in the 1990s and beyond? I hate to say this, but many of the nerds that are Gen Xers, you see, many of them did not enjoy the positive experiences that many other Gen Xers did. And so when they grew up, they got into the media and into politics and in high positions in technology and in Hollywood and in the news. And they sought their revenge against everyone because they're pissed off that they didn't have happy childhoods or happy teenage years. Now that they're adults, they're turning on everyone with a vengeance. And they're working in coordination with many baby boomers, aren't they? Take a look at the films and TV shows and video games and music that Americans and the whole world are being subjected to today. This clearly is not the 1970s and 1980s anymore. We are witnessing the systematic destruction of freedom of speech and the pursuit of happiness and the deprivation of joy and the dismantling of anything and everything that made Generation X awesome, that Gen X loved, including their music and movies. Look what younger generations are saying about what Gen X loved. They say that the songs and the movies are anti-this and anti-that, and they don't represent this person, they don't represent that person. And so it's all bad, and it should all go, and it should all be disregarded. Destroying anything that came before them seems to be the MO of younger generations today. Let's not ever forget what 19th century writer Heinrich Heine said, quote, "Where one burns books, one will soon burn people." End quote. While they were growing up, Gen Xers never tried to destroy previous generations. Gen Xers never insulted or belittled previous generations. Gen Xers were smart enough to view historic people and events in the context of when and where they lived, and to learn from the best and disregard the rest. But not to destroy the rest, or to assume that there was no best because of the rest. We all see a lot of the destruction of pop culture and history happening all around us. Happy people create. Happy people do not destroy things. Happy people do not try to tear down other people and places and events. Happy people do not try to destroy other people. Happy people do not try to destroy what other people created. I speak to a lot of Gen Xers, and you know something? They're tired of being insulted. Gen Xers are tired of younger generations making inaccurate assumptions about them and what they love and loved. As of the time of this recording, people who hate America and American history are on a rampage. The younger generations are really unhappy. And perhaps Gen Xers can do something about it, because something has to be done. Perhaps Gen Xers can begin by setting the best example possible. And among other things, sharing the music they grew up with, and encouraging younger generations to create their own music that will hopefully be happy and positive, and will get their endorphins flowing, because they sure can use it. But that is a topic for another show. So, what do you think of Generation X? Were you born between 1960 and 1980? If so, what are your thoughts about the music that influenced your life while growing up? What effect did your favorite music have on you? I bet your favorite music is still from the 70s and 80s that you heard when you were growing up. At this point, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this time travel adventure. Kindly remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because there will be more videos like this one, and I hope you'll check those out too. Please check out the links below to learn how to support my research and productions. Specifically, I'd really appreciate it if you could become a member of my channel and or join me on Patreon. You could also leave a super thanks in the comments below. Kindly be kind to all non-human animals, and please don't eat them. They don't like that. Remember, for the benefit of compassion for all living things and their own health, brilliant people throughout history, including the Beatles, chose a plant-based diet. And please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog. You and they will be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.